So my topic today is using technology to amplify student voice. And here's my agenda for the lightning talk portion of today's session. So first, I just want to tell you a little bit about OTAN in case you're not familiar with my organization. And then we're going to spend some time talking about student voice, kind of giving a definition to student voice, and then reviewing the types of student voice, kind of giving you a framework for understanding student voice. Um, so that moving forward, we'll have a sense as to what it is that we're trying to achieve in terms of bringing student voice into the classroom. We'll talk about the kind of the intersection here of technology and student voice. It's not that technology is necessary for amplifying student voice in the classroom, but there are ways to use technology tools to make student voice more a part of your classroom. And so that's what we'll kind of talk about today as well. And really for my session, I find that it's really important to kind of think about both the teacher and the student roles, right? So as a teacher, it's very easy to kind of get locked into that teacher perspective in the classroom. So really taking the time to think about like the students who are sitting in your class, whether they're in person or online, wherever they may be, kind of what is their perspective? How do they kind of see your course, your class, and their role in your class? So, in terms of planning and thinking about how to bring student voice into the classroom, it's really important to think about, well, okay, from the student's point of view, how does a student do that? Or how could a student do that? Maybe that's a better question to ask. So I also have some resources that I've included as a part of my presentation today. And I've organized them in a Canvas course. Ebony, if she can add the link to the Canvas course to the chat, then you'll have that resource available to you. And maybe if we have a minute left at the end of my lightning talk, we can take a quick look as to see the resources that are in the Canvas course. But that will be available after today as well. So feel free to visit that at your leisure. So just a word about my organization, OTAN. So we know that across the United States, adult education is organized very differently state to state. So in California, OTAN is actually one of 3 state leadership projects that support adult education. So there's OTAN, we focus on technology training for adult educators around the state. There's also an organization called CalPro, which is a part actually of AIR, and they focus on teacher and administrator professional development. And then we also have CASAS. Some of you know CASAS as the assessment, data collection, data accountability organization. So all 3 of these projects actually support adult education across the state in a variety of ways. But again, OTAN focuses on technology training for adult educators. Here is a beautiful graphic representing my organization. Probably the most important piece of information here is our website, otan.us. We have lots and lots and lots of resources on the website that are freely available for anyone, wherever you may be. Take a minute or 2 to check out our website if you haven't done so already. We also are coming up on our annual conference, our Technology and Distance Learning Symposium. Over the last 2 years, actually, it's been exclusively online. This year, we actually are aiming to organize a hybrid conference this year. We're super excited about that. We will be in the San Diego area in person at the Chula Vista Adult School, if you happen to know where Chula Vista is, in beautiful San Diego, always beautiful San Diego. But we're also going to be online as well. So we've opened up our registration this week. You can get the link there at the bottom of the slide, tdls.otan.us/registration. And we welcome anybody and everybody from across the US to join us. If you want to be with us in San Diego, fantastic. If you can't be with us in San Diego, please join us online. We have a lot of great sessions coming up during TDLS. So, all right, with that, let's turn to student voice. Enough about me. So this is a great time actually to talk about student voice. Student voice is a hot topic. It really has kind of gained some legs in the last few years. Really actually kind of interestingly in response to a lot of the social justice movement over the last couple of years. This has kind of trickled down to the classroom setting. And a lot of folks have started kind of dialing into the need to have student voice be present in classrooms. This screenshot that I've included was actually our first in-person conference that we were able to attend last year after a few years. And I noticed on the on their kind of on their mobile view here, they actually had a little section, share your thoughts, let your voice be heard. So a lot of us in education are really kind of focused on this topic right now. And again, after my presentation today, jump online, do a search for student voice, you will find lots and lots and lots of resources out there, lots of conversation as well about student voice and really how to make it be a really integral part of what's going on in classrooms. So what I wanted to do first was kind of start with an entrance ticket, and Ebony can post the link to the entrance ticket in the chat there. But actually, I don't really need you to fill out the entrance ticket. I actually just want to I want to talk about a chance here to add student voice to the entrance ticket. So I'm going to stop share. I'm going to switch over to the entrance ticket. Oh, someone's already filled it out. Wow, fantastic. Okay, so let's just take a look at this entrance ticket for a second. So this is a good example of an instructional decision that I have made that may or may not include student voice. So, this is really kind of from my benefit to know, like, what is your role at your agency? What comes to mind when you hear the term student voice? What's one thing that you hope to gain from today's session, really? So the reason why I've kind of presented this to you is because I would like to gather this information from you. But it doesn't really include, I mean, it's 100% Anthony created, right? There's no student input on this entrance ticket at all. So one of the great things about technology that we've been learning, especially over the last couple of years, is the ability to really sort of adjust things on the fly with technology. So what I wanted to do was just kind of ask all of you if there is something that you would like to know about the other people who are attending this session today. And if you'd like to put that in the chat, if you have a question that you'd like to throw out to the group, please go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, so Jen put in a question, so what they teach, right? So maybe what's their program area, okay? So let's just take that question for the moment. So again, the beauty of technology is that we can use it to really kind of do things instantaneously. And additionally, right, so we probably have a lesson plan for our class, right, where we kind of have scripted out the day. But where are the places for students to be a part of that creation and collaborative effort, for learning in the classroom? So I'm just going to go ahead and add Jen's question directly here. So let's just make it I'll make it a choice question. What is your program area? I'll just put that in for ease. I can put in a couple of options, or maybe you can suggest them in the chat as well. Oops, management. No, we'll just say ESL. We'll say high school diploma or high school equivalency. Maybe some of you teach CTE. Maybe some of you teach parent education, so on and so on. Okay. So the point is that really here, I've done a lot of the creation here, but I haven't really allowed for any student creation. So that's really the point that I'm trying to emphasize here, is that we can use technology to also include students in the creation process. It doesn't have to be entirely teacher created, teacher led, teacher driven. We can actually allow the students in to the collaboration process, and give them some more input into their own learning. Especially our adult students, like they're very curious about like who else, their fellow adult students, who's in the classroom. And so how are we able to bring that into the learning process? So here's one just kind of easy, example of how we can also bring in some of that student voice into our planning. Okay, so let me switch back to the presentation. So this is a definition of student voice from the Glossary of Education Reform. Let me give you just 30 seconds to read it on your own. Okay, so as you're finishing your reading, maybe in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, just adding the word or phrase that stands out to you in this definition. And if you want to also just, add a quick note why that appeals to you or why that stands out to you, that'd be great. And let's see if we can get some of those responses in the chat. Okay, thank you. So I see individuality. Thank you, Susan. Lori says inclusivity. Great. Anything else that stands out for people as they're reading it? Amy says cultural backgrounds. Hugh says choices. Christy, perspective. Jose, student choice. Latanya, differences. Okay. Eleanor, thank you so much. Instructional approaches and techniques based on student voice. Okay, so thank you so much for including your responses. I appreciate that. And I will say that Eleanor wins the prize. So in this definition, really that instructional approaches and techniques is really what stands out to me in this definition. It really, actually in a way, it gives me the opportunity to kind of reflect on my own practice, right? That a lot of the presence of student voice really has to do with my role as the instructor and how I have structured the lesson, the classroom, the core, all of those things. Like how do I go about kind of making those instructional decisions, day in and day out, minute by minute, hour by hour, um, all of those decisions, kind of lead us in a certain direction. And in this case, it's really those instructional decisions that will determine the amount and the extent of student voice in your classroom, right? So again, let's kind of keep that phrase in mind, instructional approaches and techniques, as we kind of go through the rest of the presentation. And again, this is the opportunity for you to reflect on your practice as a teacher and where are those points in the lesson, in the class, where you can make space for student voice. And not to say that's, maybe kind of reel it back for here for a second, not to say that student voice is not a part of your classroom, but now we have the opportunity to kind of think about student voice, sort of like, what does that really look like in the classroom? So let's take a look at these, a couple of frameworks here. So the first is, this framework is called Types of Student Voice. And you'll see that when you look at this slide, there are 6 types of student voice. So on our screen from left to right, first we have expression. The second one is consultation. The third is participation. The fourth is partnership. The fifth is activism. And the sixth is leadership. So these are kind of some researchers have basically sort of categorized student voice into these 6 different types. You'll also notice that these 6 types are along a spectrum. And across the top, we have sort of a measure of student voice, in this case, collaboration with adults, right? So on the left-hand side, we move from being heard. And if we keep moving from left to right, we get closer and closer to leadership, right? So this is really the collaboration with adults. In this case, is really, the collaboration between the teachers and the students, or students and students, maybe students and administrators, students and staff at the school. So again, there are different types of student voice. So it just, looking at this one measure, really gives us a sense as to how much, how close are we really getting to sort of student leadership, student agency, student ownership, things like that. We have to move more to the right side of this spectrum rather than staying on the left side of the spectrum, to get closer and closer to activism, leadership, and those types. Let's look at this in a second way. This, excuse me, this graphic is titled Student Voice Oriented Activity. So in the middle of this framework, we see the same 6 types of student voice: expression, consultation, participation, partnership, activism, and leadership. And now we have 2 more measures along the top. So the first says students involved as stakeholders. So if we're over on the left-hand side of the spectrum, what's happening is students are articulating their perspectives. Versus if we move from left to right, then we're getting closer on the right-hand side to students directing collective activities, right? So in a sense, it's kind of the difference between sort of passive and active. We are really moving more towards activity on the right-hand side of the screen, right-hand side of the spectrum here. There's a second measure, students as collaborators. So again, on the left-hand side, we see students categorized as data sources. That sounds very cold, but that's what they call it. But if we move from left to right, again, we're moving more in the direction of students as leaders of change. Okay, so more towards leadership and activism. On the bottom of the spectrum, a couple of different notes that I think are really illustrative here. So the first note on the left-hand side here says most student voice activity in schools or classrooms or programs or communities or whatever resides at the left-hand end of the spectrum. So more towards really just kind of asking students for, their ideas or their opinions or their perspectives, or here's an opportunity to kind of say what's on your mind. So really, most of the activity has to do with, expression and consultation. But when it moving from left to right, first the assumption is that we want to move to the right-hand side of the screen here, right? It's going to take some work to get there. So are we willing to kind of do the work, to move students along this spectrum from left to right, right? The note in the bottom right-hand part of this graphic says the need for adults, so in this case, like think about teachers, administrators, program staff, the need for adults to share authority, demonstrate trust, protect against co-optation, learn from students, and handle disagreement increases from the left to the right. So the adults in charge are going to have to do some things to actually move students along this spectrum from left to right, okay? Also, students' influence, responsibility, decision-making roles increase from left to right, right? So rather than being sort of these givers of opinion, givers of ideas, givers of perspective, we actually are trying to give them more say, more influence, more control, more leadership, more activity directed by students, more collaboration. But we've got to kind of move the group along this spectrum from left to right. Okay, so thinking about these two graphs that we've just looked at, the types and the spectrum. So kind of what are your initial questions that come to mind, right? Any thoughts or ideas, or maybe you're wanting more information after looking at these graphs. So kind of keep this in mind for our next short activity here. So many of you are familiar with a tool called Padlet. And if you're not familiar with the tool called Padlet, basically Padlet is an online bulletin board that encourages sharing and collaboration. And if Ebony could pop our Padlet link in the chat, that would be great. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I'm going to switch over to the Padlet for a moment. So the link will take you to this Padlet screen here titled ETSS Student Voice. Now, one of the first things that you may notice about this Padlet is that there's nothing, there are no questions here, right? I haven't come up with any questions that I'd like you to think about, or I haven't, there aren't any Anthony musings on this Padlet for you to respond to. What I would like to do instead is rather than me, just kind of coming up with whatever questions I can think of off the top of my head, I'd rather use your questions that you have. So after looking at those two charts, what are some questions that you might have for this group about the student voice types that we've just looked at? And you have the ability to add those questions to the Padlet. If you see the plus sign, or you might have like a little plus mark in the corner or something, if you go ahead and click that plus one, then in this case, it's popping up a little kind of window for me, and here I can put my question. So I'll just do an example. Here is Anthony's question. I'll go ahead and publish that, and now it shows up on the Padlet. You can actually respond to it, you can add a comment to it, you can like it, you can do whatever. But the point here is that actually, rather than me doing all the creation, I'd rather that you did the creation. So does anybody have any questions about the types of student voice, or the charts that we looked at, that you'd like to offer up for the group? I see some activity. So on the Padlet, you may notice at the very top of the Padlet, depending on your view, it looks like there is some activity. So people are typing some questions. So I'll wait for those questions to show up. As we're waiting, again, the idea here is that as the teacher, as the leader, I'm not doing the creation. I'm leaving it up to the students to do the creation. I would rather know kind of what questions they have. Again, as a teacher, I can think of like 2 million questions, but why should I be doing all the work? Like, why don't we leave it to the students to, take a hold of their learning? And again, I just want to just sort of reinforce or reiterate the idea that I have made, as the teacher, as the instructor, I have made an instructional choice at this point to not be the main creator of this activity. Rather, I'm turning over the creation to the students, right? The students have lots and lots of interesting questions and ideas and perspectives that they would like to share with me as the teacher, with the other students in the classroom. So I have to make an instructional choice to give them the opportunity and the space to take on that leadership role, right? If I make the choice to just put in a set of 4 questions and have students respond to that, I mean, that's fine. I'll get a version of student voice, right? But how about students being a part of the creation process, right? And giving for me as the teacher, letting go of the reins a bit here and turning it over to the students and putting more responsibility on them to kind of take control of this activity.